Okay, well, good to see you. Okay, we'll start our class on white magic. Let's go over the rule one more time. Like say, it's the wording of the rule isn't that long, but he spent a long time on this. He must figure this is an important one. As the waters bathe the form created, they are absorbed and used. The form increases in its strength. Let the magician continue until the work suffices. Let the outer builder cease their labors in, and let the inner workers enter on their cycle. Okay. We were just finishing talking about new forms that are showing up. And you got to remember this book was written around in the early 30s. I think it was published 1934 or something like that. And so you think back in that time, even in that time, for the people in that age, there was a lot of new stuff showing up, new ideas on what the atom was and everything like that. And so people were pretty much in awe of what was happening back then, and it's just increased now. If they could have seen what the world is like today, they'd be pretty impressed. He stresses the importance of soul contact to create correct new forms so that they can be not only created correctly, but embraced and recognized. Because when new things come along, people are often slow to recognize them. I remember when the personal computer first come out, almost everybody of my age says, I don't use those newfangled contraptions. I'm happy with my typewriter. And a lot of people my age just kept their typewriters for like 20 years before they finally broke down and got a computer. Same thing with the internet. The internet just first come out, it was just for, techno geeks and just a handful of people were on it. What was funny about the internet is it started out, I remember when I was on, I think it was before the World Wide Web, they had stuff on, it wasn't called an internet, but they had groups online. And I was one of the early members of AOL when it was the biggest thing going at the time, and it just had a couple 100,000 members. And when they took a poll on there, I noticed it was extremely conservative in their bent. Totally unlike today. Now the big online agents and companies are extremely on the left. But when everything started out, it was pretty much everybody was right wing. So everything changed quite a bit. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, people are slow to catch on to things that are going to benefit humanity, and they will often reject them out of hand. A lot of people just reject anything that's new. They just want life to continue just the way it is. And so anything new comes about, they're kind of have an automatic rejection of. And as we said last time, out of the new stuff that appears for society, it's not all good. Some of it's good, some of it's retrogressive, some of it would be harmful if we embraced. And so soul contact is necessary, as well as just good common sense, to be able to recognize, what should we embrace as a society and should we not embrace. For instance, when the 60s come out and censorship started to, before then, the censorship was really big, and there was too much censorship. And then all of a sudden, we threw away almost all censorship. So we went from one extreme to the other. And it was good to embrace the more openness, but maybe it wasn't so good to have such foul language replacing civil language, which happened to a degree. So we have to use common sense and soul contact to, as things change, because there is an eternal principle, and that is change is eternal. There will be change as long as there's life. Matter of fact, life is created by movement, and whenever there's movement, there's a change of one thing to another thing. And so as long as there's life, there's going to be change somewhere, because life is movement and change. And life is also a change that heads towards some type of order and beauty and creation of some kind. And so life and intelligence is heads us in a positive direction. And as participants in this life, we have to figure out what we're going to embrace and what we're going to reject. Now, he says men and women in every branch of human thought are found among this group of innovators, including scientists, philosophers, people of all grades, people of all different lines of thought, are involved in taking the world to its next level. Now, these people are not all like on spiritual thinkers. Some of them may be even atheists, but there's advanced souls in every department of life that are trying to produce things that help humanity. And oftentimes you'll have an advanced soul incarnate, and he may not be particularly spiritual. He may not even believe in an afterlife or anything, but he may have a strong impulse to serve humanity, and he may be more advanced than appears on the surface. And it's really hard to tell just by looking at somebody or seeing what they kind of business they're in, how far they are along the path. When everything is said and known in the end, we'll be surprised probably who is advanced on the path and who isn't advanced on the path. Some people who are famous, who we extol and think are really wonderful souls, maybe they're not so advanced as we think they are. And other people that work in obscurity, some of those are fairly advanced souls. So you just never know until you can pick it up intuitively where they are through soul-to-soul sensing. Now, he makes an interesting prediction here, and this is 1934, and he says within 35 years, a new approach and different fundamental concept as to the nature of matter will mark the new age. And he predicts a form-building principle of the soul will be discovered. Okay, that was said in 1934. Did this happen? I project to you that it did happen, so I challenge you to figure out what was the big discovery that he predicted that did happen.
1969. That would have been Woodstock, hey?
Yeah. See, 25 years of 54, 50, be around 59.
Discovery of germs?
What's that?
Was it the discovery of germs?
No, we discovered germs a long time before then.
Was it DNA?
Right, DNA. DNA was discovered pretty close to the time frame he mentioned there. And what is DNA? It's the form-building principle of the soul, isn't it? The DNA has all the knowledge about how to build the human form built within it. And somehow this DNA, through some almost magical means, builds the human body and has all the programming for it. And
It has the mathematical formula.
right, and so it has the principles in DNA of the form building principle of the soul for the body. So that's pretty fantastic when you think about it. I wonder if anyone else has ever realized that it was DNA that he was talking about there. We might be the first one to figure it out.
Some of the latest thought in quantum physics says that thought is what operates the DNA. It's our thoughts.
Yeah, and thought is very closely connected with the soul, and it's all linked together. Now, keep in mind that it's DNA. Let me give you this quote from the Tibetan in the next thing he says here. He says, the atom has been recognized as an energy unit, but as yet, the energy which sweeps atoms into aggregates, which we call organisms and forms, has not been isolated. Okay, in other words, in 1934, we haven't isolated what it is that sweeps these atoms into forms and organisms. But now we have, it's DNA. We've isolated it now, but we hadn't back in 1934. So he was saying this will happen, it will be isolated. He says, this the mystics in the scientific world will sense and work to demonstrate during the next generation. This is the type of energy, the energy of the form building aspect of manifestation, which is the source of all magical work. So that's interesting. The source of all magical work is encoded in our DNA, in other words. And it is this energy and its various kingdoms of nature which produces form, and all the kingdoms of nature have DNA. And the various kingdoms of nature produces form, shape, species, kind, type, and the differentiations which mark and distinguish the myriad forms through which life itself manifests. Boy, doesn't that sound like what our DNA does in all the kingdoms? And there's DNA in the plant, animal, human kingdoms produce all the variants of form. It is the quality of energy which produces the quality of forms. It is the light which causes emergence into consciousness of the race of heterogeneous shapes, which aggregates atoms can assume. But then he says this principle will be discovered, but he says the life principle, which is even a higher principle. In other words, we've discovered DNA, which is the form building principle, but what gives it life, he says, will remain undiscovered until the soul itself is studied. Okay, so we haven't discovered the life principle yet. In other words, what's the difference between what makes a thing alive? Why is a carrot alive? Why is a dog alive? Why are you alive? What's the principle that creates this life?
We're studying this life principle in this book.
Yeah, right. And but science hasn't figured it out yet.
It has to do with gathering, because you take a packet of DNA, a complete set of genes for any given thing, and you put it in just one bag, one cell. It's just like a ball. Doesn't look much like a human being. But the more of these that you put together, they begin in unity to sing a bigger, more detailed, higher definition song. And if you get, like 3 billion cells in a body all singing the same song, it produces this shape for an entire complete human being. That's the trick. It's combining bite-sized pieces of the same information to where it makes a higher definition.
So you're saying, in other words, they kind of use the principle of sound to create, in a way, kind of vibration, movement, sound, all linked together, light.
How do two little spherical cells figure out, okay, who's going to be on the head and who's going to be on the tail, or who's going to be the left side. It's like individually, they begin right from the beginning. As soon as you got two, they begin to figure out, well, I have to be on this side and I have to be on this side. But the more you get, so it has to do with gathering.
Yeah, right. The gathering principle is behind all organized life. That's true. I keep thinking back to the great scientists like Newton, for instance. He studied the eye, and he says, the eye convinces me that there has to be some divine intelligence, because the eye just couldn't organize itself. It had to be some intelligence involved there. And it's kind of discouraging that the scientists of today are so much more materialistic than the great scientists of yesteryear, like Newton, Tesla, Edison, Einstein. They all recognized that there was some great intelligence. Most of them weren't Orthodox religious people, but they were all recognized that there was some type of higher intelligence involved. And I keep visualizing these atheist scientists when they die, and then find out there's a life after death and a soul, and there's a creator, that they'll probably feel kind of silly, like, well, why didn't I recognize this? It should have been so obvious, But he says this about the great scientists and innovators. He says, these people, even though they weren't religious or spiritual, they worked as souls. They had faith in their ideas until they were materialized and accepted. So even the non-religious innovators kind of operated on the principle of faith, as it's pretty much preached by the scriptures themselves, which is interesting. Okay, he says it might be noted here that 3 great discoveries are imminent, and during the next couple of generations will revolutionize modern thought and life. The first, he says, atomic energy will eventually bring great economic freedom. Now keep in mind, this was 1934, over 10 years before the first atomic bomb went off, and about 30 years before they started generating electricity from the atom. And so he was right on in this, talking about atomic energy. Where he was a little bit off, though, was he seemed to think that we would embrace it more. Instead, we've distanced ourselves from it, and it's become a boogeyman. People are afraid of it. But he says if it's embraced and used correctly, it can free our hands and give us an unlimited amount of energy. Now, the atomic energy that it may boil down to in the future, since people are so concerned about radioactive waste, which the new units coming online have minimal waste, and we've got breeder reactors that they've pretty much perfected that we can make now that recycle waste. And then in the near future, within next, I think, 10 years or so, we're going to have our first fusion reactors on board. They're building a big fusion reactor in Europe. About a dozen different nations are participating in this, and if it's successful, we can have energy with no radioactive waste that can give us just unlimited amount of energy.
Didn't DK also, or was it somebody else, say that we would find a way to use non-radioactive elements to produce the same energy?
He did talk about non-radioactive elements that he said we could draw energy from most any element, not just U-235 like we do with the atomic bomb or plutonium, but he says there's ways to do it with every element. And we haven't figured out those ways yet. We have for a number of the elements, but not for all of them. So that's an interesting point there, Rick.
There's some evidence that Tesla actually did figure it out, but
Oh, really?
got shot down for it, so to speak, because couldn't, it would be free energy for everybody. And
oh yeah, he figured out free energy from kind of the 0 point type of thing, didn't he?
yeah, they claim he used to sit in his lab, and people would come in there and he'd have like balls of electricity in his hands that wouldn't harm you, and that there was a type of electricity, and he said, we are surrounded by so much energy, we don't know what to do with it. And eventually we'll tap our machines into it. But he got shot down because the powers that be couldn't make money off of it. So.
I read an interesting story. I went to the library one time and read old articles on Tesla from the library archives, and I come across one story that I haven't read in any other book. It was interesting. It was when he had his lab, I think in New York. He says there was a series of minor earthquakes, and they couldn't figure out what was causing them, and they suspected maybe Tesla was up to something. So the police got a warrant or something. They broke into his lab, and when they broke into his lab, he discovered there was this device that he had there that was humming away, and it was causing a lot of vibration, and the whole city was shaking at the time. And when Tesla saw the police break into his lab, he grabbed a sledgehammer and he broke it. Hammered the device, and when he hit the device with a sledgehammer, all the shaking stopped. So I thought that was a funny story. So nobody ever knew what he was working on. I mean, that's the only source of that story I'd ever read was in that old magazine article.
Yeah, he had made vibrators or buzzers that you could attach. It was only hand sized. You could attach it to a beam on a building, and that little thing, it would get the whole building sympathetically attuned to it, and then just shake it down to the ground. One little box this big. Yeah,
a lot of people suspect also he made that mysterious. There's the mysterious asteroid kind of hit in Siberia about 100 years ago, and a lot of people suspected he created some kind of ray that did that. That he was behind it, because to this date they've never been able to figure out what in the world caused that. If it was some type of, they can't find the remnants of the meteor or asteroid that's supposed to have done this.
That was Tunguska.
Yeah, right. That's what it was.
Have you noticed in Paradise, California, they're saying that fire that destroyed that community, there was no outside fire that came. It just, everything burned at the same time. All the houses on the north end or the south end, east, west, they all caught fire and burned at the same time. And they got aerial photos that showed that fire didn't come from the outside. It was like a beam of energy just exploded that whole community.
Yeah, I read that they think it might have been microwave energy from some attack because
HARP technology.
Because like plastic garbage or garbage cans were completely not even burnt, yet metal right next to them was incinerated, and microwave destroys metal but doesn't hurt plastic. And so they think it was there's a lot of conspiracy theories floating around, which are, if they're true, it really makes you think. You just never know how much of them are true. But I've seen pictures of plastic garbage cans which are just completely intact right next to, say, a car that's been incinerated. And so that's kind of weird.
That was with the Tunguska blast? Or something?
No, that's in Paradise, California, right? Just a while back during the fires. They think
about a week ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, conspiracy people think that there was some type of microwave energy that was at play there because it incinerated metal but didn't burn plastic, and so that's pretty weird.
But the only technology we know of that has that capability right now is HARP Technologies, where they can send a beam, a focused beam. They're controlling weather. You know, they've been doing that for quite a while.
That we know.
Yeah,
For thought.
that's what a lot of people think. Okay, let's move ahead here. He says we will learn to recognize a person's evolution. Oh, he says the second thing that we'll discover is we'll study color, its effect on humans, and that'll lead to etheric vision and the study thereof. Now, they have done quite a bit of study with color and its effect on humans. A lot of people now are recommending painting your using different colors for different effects. And he says, what he says is kind of interesting is we'll learn to recognize a person's evolution by their colors, which will lead to the rule of the enlightened and looking beyond race. So that's pretty interesting. So this is study of colors has had its beginning, but not its end. And it's interesting that we will eventually learn to see colors connected with a person because according to people that have been regressed between lives, we know that in the spirit world, between lives, when you meet another person, everybody's surrounded by different colors according to their state of evolution. New souls are pretty much covered with white light, which is kind of interesting because you kind of associate white light with advanced souls. But he says the new souls are with white light, then they eventually evolve into red and yellow, and then blue, and then a deeper and deeper blue. And the masters, he says, are a very deep indigo or blue color. And so when you meet anyone in the next world, you pretty much know where they are. And he said, and the Tibetan says that's going to happen in this world. And then when a good portion of the populace can look at another person and see their state of evolution, and they're running for Congress, who are we going to vote for if one guy has a red aura, another guy has a nice deep blue aura? You know, we're going to vote for the blue guy.
I was going to say it'd be nice if we could see that with at least with the politicians right now. Huh?
Yeah, it'd be nice if we got an idea of where they are in their evolution. But
I think most of them will be white.
yeah, I think we got a lot of new souls there.
It reminds me of the belts in martial arts. They're all a bunch of white belts.
Oh, are they? White belt is that the first belt?
Yeah, that's the lowest.
Oh, is it? Hey, maybe they were inspired to come up with that.
That's entry level.
Yeah. And and black belt is the highest. And you know, in the in esoteric teachings, the greatest light is actually perceived by us as the greatest blackness.
Yeah,
and it's just beyond our ability to see it, so it looks black. And when you look into space, you just see blackness, even though there's lots of light shining through space. So the fact that there's blackness there doesn't mean necessarily there's a lack of light. Which is
a pair of Aura goggles one time that I bought. I don't know, it was probably an advertisement on the back of a comic book or something. These Aura goggles were very, very, very dark, ultraviolet color. You practically couldn't see through them unless you were outside. But if you wore them for very long each day, it got to when you took them off, you could see the etheric auras around things.
Really?
So etheric vision was being developed through the color, or looking through the color purple.
Yeah. Well, we're just scratching the surface on this sound or color studies. They've done some studies on it, but according to DK, we're going to go much deeper as time goes on. Okay, the third place we'll be doing research is the study of sound, which all forms give off, leading to creation by sound. He says the release of energy in the atom is linked to this coming science of sound. What's interesting, radioactivity detector creates a sound. It picks up all these sounds coming from the radioactive particles. So maybe that was the beginning of understanding of linking the atom with sound. But when you look at these predictions, we're just at the start of them, and it's probably going to go on for a couple hundred years before we really develop them completely. But we're going to learn to actually create with sound. Eventually, we'll be able to put out fires by using sound. So we won't have to use water to put out fires, but we can use sound. And so sound's going to be used for all kinds of different purposes, and this will be an interesting science. One thing that really impressed me about sound for the first time, it was about 30 years ago. We went to this science display or science thing they were giving. My wife and I were up in Canada, and the guy had demonstrated, he put these magnetic filings on this plate and then created a sound underneath it, and then these little magnetic filings moved into very beautiful forms, and then he changed the sound and the forms changed, but they were not just simple forms. They were very complicated but beautiful, symmetrical looking forms just created by sound. And that kind of turned a light on my head as to, the ancient teachings tell us that God sounded the Om, and from the Om created the whole universe. And that thought came to my mind as I watched this guy use sound to create these beautiful forms. I could see how a sound that sounds maybe quite simple can create something quite complex. So
there's a bunch of videos on YouTube now that people do that with sand.
Yeah.
And they do all kinds of things. I've always had this vision of healing rooms that were painted certain colors, and you would have certain frequencies or sulfogio tones for healing, and also essential oil dispensers where people could go into a certain color room with certain sounds and get healed of whatever. Kind of had this vision of something like that for a long, long time, but I've never,
Yeah, mainstream science isn't doing a lot with it, but a lot of kind of independent thinkers are. I come across this site on the internet a while back. They told you it's still there. I imagine I've lost track of it by now, but there's different sounds that they have that will create different healing effects. And what they do is they have you take an earphone, take the cushion off of it, and then apply it to a part of your body that you want to heal. And then you find the sound that is linked to this part of your body, and you turn it up loud, and you can feel the vibration on your skin a little bit from the sound. And that's supposed to produce fairly miraculous healing. And they have all the sounds that are on the internet, probably still there. If somebody wants to Google it, do some research, they could probably find one or two sites that do this type of thing. This was several years ago I did this, and I kind of played around with it. I didn't have much wrong with me, so I couldn't really test it completely, but it seemed to have some effect, far as I could tell.
There's a
But
gal that uses tuning forks to do something like that.
yeah, tuning forks too is big. You know, and crystals with the ball that they spin around in it to make different sounds. You know, and
Another note on the the properties of sound is or the power of them is that wheels, you know, that you put on a car, whenever they want to form them to a certain shape of centricity or circular motion, they use sound to it vibrates the metal to a point where it molds the rim of the wheel the way they want it, just through this process of sound.
yeah. Then he says this about sound.
Pretty strong.
He says sounds. We have all kinds of new sounds in this age. He says sounds coming into our cities and our homes through TV and a lot of other sources now since 1934. He says they're producing unrealized effects and will affect all lives and even cause some animal and vegetable species to disappear. I found that kind of interesting.
That's big on the internet right now, the whole 5G thing.
Yeah.
The internet that says it's not only is it killing animals, it's harming people. It puts out thousands of times greater radiation than anything they've ever put out before. And
no, what puts out radiation?
This new form of internet broad radiation is like called 5G, or is it? Yeah, 5G.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's protests all over the world about it. They don't want it. It's like it kills things. It's got such a high level of radiation. You could stand right in the middle of Hiroshima and not get as much radiation as you're getting from this new form of internet they came up with.
Really? Well,
yeah.
maybe the sound too, and all this electrical vibration is kind of a form of sound. Maybe that has something to do with the problem we're having with the bees disappearing too.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, they still haven't figured out what's causing the problem with the bees.
All our cell phones.
Actually, they have figured out the bee problem. It's a certain type of pesticides.
Is it? I know that's probably got something to do with it. That's for sure.
They found that that's the main problem. That it's there are other things that are.
Was it that Roundup or something?
Yeah,
Roundup.
they call it the neocotinoidicide. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah.
Chemicals is what's mainly killing off the.
Yeah, we gotta.
There's a sister poison. There's a sister poison to Roundup called. It's a combination of numbers and letters like E5GH or something like that. And it's a sister poison used with Roundup, and between the combination of them, runoff, they're killing everything. Yeah.
2,4-D. Roundup.
Bees.
The main ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate, which they have now found in Arctic foxes, and so basically they polluted the entire planet with Roundup.
Yeah, that's too bad. Yeah, these chemicals that we're releasing have been something that I really support eliminating, and we can have good organic farming that produces just as much if the sound principles are involved. I know Blaine's been looking into this type of different types of farming methods that can produce a lot.
Yeah, we could easily do it. It's just, it's all about the money still, and it's slowly changing, but it could change a lot faster, but it is slowly changing, and there's more demand now for organic and natural healthy foods than there is people producing it now, and that's a good thing because that's going to cause more people.
Yeah, I'm glad you see organic showing up more and more. I buy organic whenever possible. And
the European countries have outlawed those chemicals that kill the bees, and we're kind of like the last country to do that because there's a lot of special interest groups that make money out of that. So,
yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says he points out that sound sound can be very beneficial or very destructive. And one of the experiments they've done that illustrates this is sound on plants. They played, beautiful classical music next to plants, and then acid rock and roll. And when they play the beautiful music, the plants move toward the music. And when they play the acid rock, the plants grow away from the sound. So that's not a very strong endorsement of some of the acid rock that has been around lately. But good endorsement for Beethoven and the classical guys. Okay, actually, I kind of partial to kind of the in-between, the good old 60s type rock and roll I really enjoyed. Handful of the songs today I like, but I remember when I was a teenager, there was like 2 or 3 really good songs came out every week, it seemed like. Now, maybe once every 3 months or something I like. But it seems to be, maybe it's because of my generation or whatever, but it seemed like the older generation never likes the music of the younger generation. But I might say there's a lot of younger people still like the Beatles. So you meet younger people that say, yeah, I listen to the Beatles, I really liked them. And so there's certain music that will be enjoyed for generations to come, and others that's just a fad and will come and go. Okay. He says, these 3 developments will usher in a new age of brotherhood. And concerning sound, he says this: the work of the world will be carried forward through the medium of sound, and eventually through the use of words of power and the work of the trained magician. These trained workers in substance, understanding the nature of matter, seeing always in terms of light, and comprehending the purpose of sound, will bring about those structural changes and those material transformations which will establish a civilization adequate for the work of the coming race. This work will be that of conscious unification of the soul and its vehicle of manifestation. Well, this prediction probably will be over he's talking about the new age, so to speak, and we're looking at another 100 years, he says, before the new age is securely in. And so this prediction here, where people will work with sound this way and use words of power, that probably won't be fully in for some time to come, but it's interesting to contemplate and look forward to, and understand that we as individuals are instruments of much more power than we think. We think power comes from having some type of physical instrument, a hot car or some type of machinery, but the greatest power is the individual himself. And he points out a number of places that we're going to develop a lot of power as individuals to create. And he says this, that the inventions that people have made foreshadow what we will develop. For instance, the telephone was invented in the time he was writing this, and he said that the telephone merely foreshadows what we will be able to do as individuals. Right now, we can call somebody up and talk to them. He says the time will come when you can just tune in with your mind to whoever you want to contact and communicate by mental telepathy. We will eventually develop that power. And the television, the same way. We can see images on the television. He says we will eventually be able to develop the power that's given to us from television without having a television. And that'd be kind of cool when you think about it.
Well, there are these exercises called remote viewing.
Yeah, that's becoming pretty popular.
I played around with that before. It actually works.
Have you? Have you actually done it?
Yeah, yeah. We
Yeah.
used to. It's been several years, but we used to. Two of us would be online, and so we'd say, okay, let's see, see if you can describe the room that I'm in, and we were actually pretty surprised at how accurate we were.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, it takes a little attention to develop the supernatural abilities. Like when I learned to see auras, it took me quite a while and a lot of attention to learn to do it right. And the same thing with any of these things. It takes quite a bit of focus. So one of the problems we have as seekers is we can't do everything. So what we have to do is figure out what we want to do as our next step and really focus on that, realizing we can't do everything at once anyway. So
did any of you look at that link that I posted? Supposedly a NASA scientist has come up with a model for a warp drive.
yeah, I read that. That was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Mindy's pretty good at that remote viewing stuff too.
I wouldn't be surprised. She has a lot going on under the surface that you can't tell just by talking to her. Okay, he talks about the outstanding characteristic, he says, of the coming cycle will be an outgrowth of psychology. The existence of the soul and the influence of the seven rays will be part of the approach. So we're going to understand more. When he talks about psychology, he's not talking about psychology as we think about it, where you're sitting on a couch and being analyzed, but he's talking about understanding the makeup of the human being and why we are the way that we are. And a lot of that is connection to the seven rays, which are seven influences. And they influence our physical body, our etheric body, our emotions, our mind, our personality, which is a combination of all these things, and then our soul is on one of these seven rays. And then on top of this, we have all the astrological influences, and this is all part of the human, what he calls the human esoteric psychology. Okay, he says we have a tendency of three lines of thought, roughly speaking, in this field of psychology. Everything is related to the physical material side is number one. Number two, he says an introspective school which recognizes and deals with consciousness, which goes beyond the physical causes. Okay, so psychologists have studied consciousness to an extent, but they haven't concentrated much on going beyond the physical and consciousness. And three, there's the vitalists that recognize outer influences. These are three schools of psychology. He says these three aspects are the one truth, are the one truth, and none are yet complete. We must learn to differentiate between the ego and the apparatus it uses. This will lead to discovering external influences. Okay, so the psychologists today concentrate on, most of them see us as just physical beings that have evolved and everything has a physical cause. We're affected by our environment. They recognize that. He says there's some truth, but we're going to go much beyond this in the what we discover about psychology in the future. And to really make the discoveries, we have to understand that there is a higher part of ourself called the soul. And the soul uses our bodies, our minds, our feelings as vehicles. And when we get to this point, he says, then the real breakthroughs in esoteric psychology will be made. And he says it'll be made from a blending of these three presentations. There will emerge a fourth, which will be nearer the truth than any of the separate three. So the separate three, again, is just one as people just concentrate on the physical. Others concentrate on consciousness, but not spiritual consciousness. And then others concentrate on our environment. And he says we won't discard the truths from these things, but we're going to go way beyond it. Okay, any comments or questions before we wrap it up here?
I have one other thing that I took notes of this week regarding promoting your teachings and teachings of the Brotherhood of Light. It helps to mention in when you put out videos, when you put out books, when you put out ads, anything. It's like it helps to mention groups that you teach in, like JJ Dewey of the Keys of Knowledge, the molecular, that's kind of like provides people with credentials that earn the authority. There's a lot of people out there who they're attracted to. One of the first questions they ever asked you 20 years ago is like, do you have a group?
Yeah.
If you've got a group, then people like, they're looking for groups to join that teach the truth. And it's like that, oh, this guy's got a group. He's, it's like saying, well, you're a rock star when you have groupies.
Yeah.
It's just something to think about. It's like it helps get the word out to more people. So
you think we need to get the word out more that we have a Keys group?
Yeah, mention them someplace in any of your promoting. Say, this is JJ, the head.
Now, when I share from the Keys group, it has the Keys group on the links, which is good because they can click on the Keys there and come to the group.
Yeah, I just think it's important in promoting your, your work. It's like, yeah, I've got a group.
Yeah, maybe I ought to do a little advertising of the Keys group itself. See if that does anything.
That adds credentials.
Yeah.
So I've had a couple of friends join the Keys group from forwarding your quotes and.
Oh, good.
Which good. I didn't even know. All of a sudden, I saw that they were members of the group, and I went, "Oh, cool."
Well, we're having more success on Facebook. We kind of reached a point in Yahoo groups where we stayed the same size for about 5 years, hardly grew at all. We just reached a plateau and stayed there, and now on Facebook we just continue to move ahead. So that's good. And my only complaint with Facebook, not my only, but main complaint about Facebook people is they're into sound bites. You give them much more than a sound bite, they complain there's too much to read. Whereas I think a real seeker kind of likes a little bit of meat, something to kind of give him something to really think about. Whereas a lot of people on Facebook there's so much stuff on Facebook. You read something's more than one paragraph, you kind of tend to move on to the next thing unless it really grabs you.
Yeah, it helps to have good illustrations.
Yeah, I noticed when I've been putting my thoughts with my posts, I get more hits than if I just make a post. So I'm making good use of my the graphics with my quotes on.
I'll tell you one thing I've discovered. So I've been posting a lot of stuff on Facebook and Instagram and so on. A video or a vlog, as they call it, gets probably 2 to 3 times the interaction than just a post, an article, or even a nice picture with a quote and words. So might be something to think about. You might want to put out a vlog, once a week or something like that, maybe, or once every couple of weeks.
No, I usually post some written thing once a day. Would you? Are you thinking of something different than that, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, a video of you talking about whatever the subject is, and it only needs to be, 2 or 3 minutes, or or it could
Oh,
be
yeah.
longer. You probably don't want to go over 5 minutes, because, like you say, people, people have a short attention span.
So if I make a post, make a short video, kind of capsulizing it or something.
Yeah, yeah. Try it a couple times and see what you think. You'll get, and then look at your, because one good thing about Facebook is it shows all the insights on your post. It tells you what, who
Yeah.
people interacted with it, saw it, that kind of thing.
Okay. Well.
I've noticed pretty consistently, as I try to do a video once a week, although lately I've probably only been doing it once a month.
Yeah.
But my videos always get way more interaction, at least double, sometimes triple the interaction that.
Really.
Yeah, and it's usually just off the cuff, just talking about some subject that I felt like talking about for a few minutes. And,
Really.
yeah.
Interesting. Interesting thought. Gives me some food for thought there, Blaine. Thanks. Okay. Any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
Well, I prefer to watch a video than to go through all these things you have to read for, miles and miles of print.
Yeah.
And when I find something important, I print it out so I can read it at my leisure.
Yeah. And don't you hate it when somebody posts a big long blog and the type is really tiny? When that's the case, I copy it and paste it onto something else for it and make the type bigger.
Yeah, I always change the font to something I can read.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they post things on the internet that's has very light colors that's really hard to read. I don't know why anyone would do that. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Well, I was just going to mention on the, the video aspect of it. When I'm driving, often I'll just go to YouTube and find a video that's mostly talking. If it doesn't have, things to watch, but just mostly a narrative, then I'll just listen to that while I'm driving, and then
Yeah,
I'm able to pick up information that I can't do otherwise while I'm driving.
yeah. There's some actual books on YouTube with just talking, which is seems kind of odd since it's a video place, but I guess they still get hits. But
Yeah,
yeah,
most of the classic books and things like Think and Grow Rich and a lot of the positive motivation guys, their books are all on YouTube.
Oh, really?
I do that too, yeah, especially if I'm going to be on a long drive, I'll put in a book and or I'll go on YouTube and search. And there's a really good channel that I go to called You Are Creators, and he has a whole bunch of the old classic.
Oh, does he?
Positive motivation books and stuff, and they're really good.
Huh.
And he'll put a few pictures of different things on there for visual, but
Yeah.
you're driving, you can't watch the video, and it's nice.
Yeah. What I do is I always have audio books to listen to when I'm, just doing chores, driving or whatever. And so it really helps to make use of your time. That's one thing I really appreciate about modern technology is helps us to make use of our time.
JJ, how many books are how many of your books are narrated?
I have narrated myself book one of The Immortal, and all the Immortal books I have done by computer voice. The rest of them
I see.
I have available if anybody wants them.
I see.
Yeah, I don't have them posted online, but I do have them available for people that need to have audio to listen to. Yeah.
Okay. And so your other books like The Molecular Relationship and others.
Well, actually, John, one of our members, John Crane, turned all of my writings up to, I think, 2009 or something into audio, and he posted them online at one time. I have them saved somewhere, but if you ever want them, I could send them to you on a disc or something. But actually, there's a place on the internet now you can transfer up to 2 gigabytes of data just on the internet for free. So,
and what is that
let me check my check, and I'll be right back.
There's several of them, and one of them is Dropbox. Dropbox, you can transfer all kind of files.
Yeah, I know with Dropbox you can.
Of course, you can use
Let me
YouTube too.
find it. Just a minute.
Do you have a YouTube
It's
channel?
called.
So I'd say YouTube is very accessible, more so than Dropbox and others.
It's called WeTransfer. If you want to do a search for WeTransfer, you don't have to join anything or anything. You can just go on there and transfer up to 2 gigabytes. It's pretty handy. Okay, guess about time to sign off, everybody. We appreciate you showing up, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday, all being well.
JJ.
Thanks, JJ.
What was
Thanks.
that, Ed?
Okay, light and love, everybody. I think that's Ed.
Okay, I was gonna say that's a
That sounded like a dinner bell.
Tibetan
Oh, is that
sound.
you, Ed? That's Edward doing that. He's the one making that sound. He's experimenting with the science of sound we were talking about.
Yeah, I told you we needed a bell.
Yeah, he's certainly got one there.
That's what's that called? A Tibetan sound bowl, or what's that called, Edward?
It's a Tibetan
bowl
bowl.
of some kind, yeah. Got the word Tibetan in anyway. Okay, we'll see you next week.
All right.
Okay.